Don't think about a pink elephant right now. You're thinking about it, aren't you? Well, that's because you have intrusive thoughts, and this is the final video you'll ever have to watch to help you manage them. Over the next few minutes, I'll explain where our negative intrusive thoughts come from and give you actionable tricks you can use to reduce their power and take back control of your mind. Just a few years ago, I struggled a lot with negative thought patterns that I just couldn't seem to shake. I was very socially anxious and had little to no self-belief, which made my mental health suffer. Then I came across the key ideas I want to express to you in this video, and things started to gradually change. My mind is not perfect by any means, but I'm in a much better position than I was. I want you to imagine for a moment that your mind is like a theatre, and all of your thoughts create the play being performed on stage. The plot consists of many flashbacks to the past and projections to the future, and the mood of each scene changes depending on your mental state. This piece of drama that seems to be going on in your mind at all times is so interesting, because sometimes it seems that we are both an actor and an audience member at the same time. At times we feel we are consciously driving what we think about, but in many cases, in fact most cases, thoughts just spontaneously arise in our consciousness. And often the thoughts that spontaneously arise in our minds are the ones we do not want to experience. The heartbreak, the low self-esteem, the anxiety, the fear, the hopelessness, the trauma. And this phenomena leads me to question whether we are actually in control of the drama in our mind at all. We can't really decide what we think about, right? So then we can't really decide what goes on in each scene. In fact, it seems we are randomly put into this play, we're randomly given this mind, and we have to improvise so the show can just go on. Because in the past, I wouldn't have chosen to be socially anxious, and you wouldn't choose to have the intrusive thoughts that have led you to click on my video. So if we don't actually choose what we think most of the time, then where do those random, unwanted thoughts come from? Well, this has been a large mystery for psychologists and neuroscientists for decades, and they've struggled to come to a clear conclusion. The problem is that the brain and the body can be observed and measured by anyone outside of you, right? But your mind is not the same. The only person who can really observe someone's thought patterns is the thinker themselves. And that's why throughout the rest of this video, we're going to aim to come to our own conclusions about our intrusive thoughts. We're now going to do an experiment together. This thought experiment came from neuroscientist and modern philosopher Sam Harris in his podcast discussing the idea that free will is a complete illusion. What I want you to do now is close your eyes, actually do it because this will be interesting, and I want you to think of a movie. Now you have that movie in your mind, I want you to think about whether you actually knew beforehand which movie was going to arise in your mind. If you think very closely, you'll realize that you didn't actually consciously select the movie that arose in your mind. You just heard me say the word movie, and a title and a bunch of images started to arise in your consciousness. The conclusion that I'm really looking to come to here is that the majority of the thoughts we have are intrusive, i.e., you don't specifically select that thought because you don't know what thought you are going to have next. Therefore, maybe where your thoughts come from isn't within you, the conscious self, at all. Maybe you are merely the receptor of thoughts rather than the generator. Let me use an analogy to expand on this point. When I get in my car and turn the radio on, I can change the radio station by changing the frequency of the sound that my car picks up. This allows me to listen to classical music, to 80s pop, or to 90s dance music by just changing the dial. Maybe our brains are simply like a radio antenna, and thoughts are like sound waves floating in a metaphysical dimension. We can't perceive this dimension, and maybe just like a car radio antenna picks up the frequencies of a radio station, our minds pick up the frequencies of thoughts in some metaphysical unconscious ether that we then experience. This sounds pretty abstract, I know, but if you view your unconscious mind as this ether of thought frequencies that haven't yet been picked up by your conscious mind, then you can start to see that this theory might have some weight to it. And what this means is quite profound, and it's what Eastern philosophy and Eastern religion has been talking about for millennia. You are not your thoughts. In fact, your thoughts can be viewed as the first layer of your external experience of the world. They are similar to the sensation that you are too hot or too cold, or that you are hungry. It's only because they arise within our minds that we feel we must own them. But the truth is, you own the majority of your thoughts just as much as you own the breeze that brushes across your face when you go for a walk. So the first part of the solution to our negative intrusive thoughts is to truly accept that idea. They may intrude into your mind when you don't wish them to, but that isn't your fault, and it isn't an excuse to think that you're messed up in the head or anything silly like that. So the first part of the solution to negative intrusive thoughts is acceptance of that idea. It just means that you have to build some self-awareness and detach yourself from the negative intrusive thoughts that enter your mind. That theatre production going on in your head right now is going to involve characters and events that you don't like. But the show must go on. And all the best stories have evil characters and unexpected events within them. The second part of this solution to intrusive thoughts comes from the car analogy that I mentioned earlier in the video. If you want to try and reduce the probability that you will experience constant negative thoughts, then you have to change the radio dial of your mind. And what that means in real life, actionable terms, is that you have to put yourself into a different state of being to promote more positive thoughts. A great example of this is what's called flow state, and it's something I might make a whole video on in the future. It's the state of being that athletes call in the zone, where you have sharp focus on one single task and you lose your sense of self, sense of time, and you don't really think much at all. In a flow state, there is just no space for negative intrusive thoughts about your past, your present, or your future. Another smaller example would be gratitude. Psychologists have done research finding that people who wrote down things they were grateful for or wrote a gratitude letter to a loved one were reliably happier. They were more optimistic and felt better about their lives, and they were also more likely to exercise and look after their health. When you appreciate the positive of something and someone else, you have changed the radio dial of your mind to pick up a different frequency of thought. You are much less likely to be picking up thoughts of your own mistakes and your own pain. And you can, over time, train yourself to change the dial of your mind and tilt it towards the positive. It's by no means easy. It's difficult, it's a long process, but it is so doable until positivity and a slightly more optimistic view of the world and slightly more optimistic thought patterns become close to second nature. So the next time that a painful thought comes into your mind, or someone tells you not to think of a pink elephant, you can remind yourself that you are not your thoughts, and that you can try to change the dial on the radio of your mind by entering a different state of being. However, you might find this process extremely difficult if your mind is addicted to a certain radio station or a certain pattern of thought. But luckily, I put together an entire video on addictions and a hypothesis of how we can manage our addictions in our daily lives, and you can watch that right now.